Kellerman and Derek Sheeler, interviewing Ross Anderson for 2 veterans projects.
All right. How old were you when you first entered in there?
I was 21 in September. The draft came out in October, so I just made it.
Okay. What division were you in, and what was your specific job?
Well, I went through basic training, which is 3 months of I was in the infantry, 28th Infantry Regiment, in Fort Jackson, South Carolina. And we were trained to be infantrymen. And infantry's job is to kill people and blow up things. After basic training, I became a dispatch rider. Now, in today's Army, they don't have dispatch riders, they have radios and communications, but in those days, you had runners for short distances. If you had to take messages long distances, you had a motorcycle. And these motorcycles were huge old Indian 74s that they had taken the sidecars off. They were from World War I. And of course, with all that power and the sidecars gone, they were kind of tricky to handle. And among their jobs, outside of delivering messages and so forth, you had to take care of convoys. When they'd run, 100 trucks or so, you had dispatch riders who controlled the traffic at intersections ahead of those people. Now, the dangerous part of this job was when you stop traffic at an intersection, everybody went by you. So now you have to get back up in front. There's 2 of you, but you still have to get up front to take the other guy's place. And of course, with traffic coming the other way, those days you were 2-lane highway. So we had to dodge in and out 1 truck at a time until you could get up front. And that was the dangerous part of that job. So after I got to be the dispatch rider, it kind of exposed me to transfer because they were forming what was called the Maroon Force, which was to be an expeditionary force. Now this is in July of 1941 that I finished my basic and I was a dispatch rider. The 28th Infantry had 3 battalions. Each battalion had 2 dispatch riders, and they were asked to furnish. Each battalion was to furnish a dispatch rider to the Maroon Force, which was he knew he was going somewhere on the boat. Anyway, the other dispatch rider in the battalion was a regular veteran, and of course he knew what to do in the case he was over there, so that we couldn't send him. That would get him busted, but he wouldn't be going to sea. So when the time came, I was turned over to the Naval Force. I left the 28th Infantry and all my friends, and I joined the Naval Force. We couldn't get furloughs or anything like that. So but they would give me overnight pass, so I got an overnight pass, and I hopped on the bus for Orchard Park. Now I'm down in South Carolina. I got an overnight pass. I've gone back to Orchard Park. So one of my friends, one of the other dispatch riders from the other battalion, had my home phone number just to call me if anything happened. So when home to Orchard Park and was having a good time for 3-4 days, and all of a sudden the phone rang, and it was Don Mason. He says, "Hey, we're moving out. We're moving out. You better get back here." So I grabbed a plane to New York and another plane to Charleston, took a bus to Fort Jackson, and only to find out they'd already left. So I jumped on another, I knew where they had gone. They had gone to Charleston, so I jumped on another bus and went back to Charleston, and I found Don Mason. He had taken my barracks bags and everything with him, so that actually nobody knew I was even gone. So he'd been answering here for me. Anytime my name came up, he'd say, "Hey." And so they didn't even know I was gone. Otherwise, I would have been in a lot of trouble, and I would have lost my rating. I was a T5, being a dispatch writer, and you're a specialist, and you had a T5 rating, which gave me the corporal's pay. We had been paid $21 a month during basic, and after basic, if you became a regular private, you got $30 a month. We had a little song, it's called, about our pay. It was $21 a day, once a month. So you can figure out we weren't very well paid. They took, out of this $21, they took your insurance, and they took your laundry, cost of your laundry, and your PX books, which they made sure you had PX books so that you wouldn't run out of toilet articles and so forth during the month. In other words, you couldn't spend all your money getting PX books. And anyway, getting back to the to being over the hill and getting back safely, we watched it. We were at a staging area in Charleston, South Carolina, and at the staging area we see this big ship being loaded with all kinds of stuff. For a couple of days they kept loading stuff, and then we didn't realize what it was, but it was a troop ship. And it was going to be our home for the next 17 days. And you want me to continue here, or you want to ask questions? So anyway, we left Charleston Harbor, and we hit a hurricane immediately after we left the harbor. They must have known it was coming, and they wanted to get out of the harbor. We didn't want to get caught in the harbor. And so for the next 5 days, we were only going, our first stop was Bermuda. So during the hurricane, the next 5 days were just up and down. Everybody was sick, including the crew. And those of us that didn't get sick, well, everybody was, because some was quite sick. And they were looking for able bodies to handle some of the jobs because the crew was sick. And so they captured me one day and put me in the gun crew. I had no idea how to handle a naval gun, but I was on the gun crew. And after that, I hid out they had trucks in the hole, and they had the canvas roofs on them. And I snuck up in there, and I hid there for a couple of days so that nobody could find me. And of course, you couldn't, the mess hall and the kitchen were closed, but they had stuff laid out to make a sandwich if you got hungry, if you people wanted to eat, because it's a huge ship. And finally we got to Bermuda, but nobody was allowed off the ship because we were going to leave for the day and leave the next morning. So 6 of us volunteered to unload supplies onto a barge that was tied up next door. And so the crane operator couldn't see us. He was here. The barge, he couldn't see it. where the stuff was going to land. It was in cargo nets. These big fish nets out of heavy rope, and they pile all kinds of stuff into that so that they didn't have to lift things in a bit here. So he would bring it over the top, and he would signal when it was still off the deck, so that when it dropped, the packaging would break open, and we could get at the stuff that was in the packaging. Well, there was all kinds of goodies. I can remember there was 5-pound blocks of cheese, American cheese, and there was quart bottles of Coca-Cola, and there was these big 1-pound Hershey bars, and we kept stuffing it back in the portholes. The portholes were from the ship were right next to us, so we kept stuffing that stuff in there to the guys on the ship, and we were glad to be off the ship because they were still cleaning up this mess that was left from the hurricane. You know, in the heads, the vomit was ankle deep in the heads. Nobody wanted to clean that up. So we were happy to be out on this boat. But the only problem was that all the stuff that we passed in to the guys on the ship, they didn't save any for us. So we got kind of hornswoggled there. But then after lunch, they made an announcement that there were 6 of us. The men that were volunteered to the barge could be take the afternoon off the ship, which nobody else was going to get. So sometimes it helps to volunteer, but not often in the end. And so we went to this hotel. Now we're on Bermuda. Bermuda was a big vacation spot. Not at that time, but before the war, because this is British territory and they're at war. We're not. So anyway, we went to this hotel, we rented bicycles, and we rode all around this island. It's not very big. And we checked it all over. It was very British, probably still is. And we left the next day for Puerto Rico. After we arrived at Puerto Rico, they left us off the ship at San Juan, and everybody went out and had a few beers. And we were there for 2 days. And then left for... Where do we go next? Cuba, the Marine base at Cuba. And from there to Antigua. And then we couldn't get off either of those places because in Antigua our ship was too big, it couldn't dock. And so then they went on to St. Lucia. And from St. Lucia, they left supposedly for the Panama Canal, which was west from us. And but during the night, the next morning we woke up and we're going the wrong way for Panama. We're going southeast, which is not the direction from Panama. And nobody knew where we were going. Nobody knew the geography of the area. We had no idea where we were going. So a day or two later, we landed in Port of Spain, Trinidad. Trinidad was a large British island east of Venezuela and north of Guyana. French Guyana, Dutch Guyana, and British Guyana. We have different names. And he landed us there, put us up in tents right on the docks in Port of Spain. And we find out that we were replacing British troops there. Now, here again, this is British territory. Britain is at war, but we're not. So we're kind of guests in a way, and yet we're part of a lend-lease, what they call a lend-lease agreement with Britain. We'd agreed to lend them 50 mothballed destroyers from World War I. And in return, we were able to build bases on British territory to protect our southern flag in case we ever got into this war, which was obvious that somebody would. And so we placed the British troops there. A company of Highlanders light infantry left, and we took over their barracks right in Port of Spain. So it's kind of like a day job being in the Army before the war. You had a permanent pass. If you were on duty, you could go and come as you pleased. We were dispatch riders, but we got straight there. There were no dispatch riders. There were no jobs for us. So the three of us, Don Mason, Joe Ball, and I, who I kind of follow all through in this ongoing saga of mine. Anyway, we had these 2-5 ratings, and we were the only draftees in the whole company. Now the first sergeant was an old timer, and he hated our guts because we were draftees. There weren't no draftees in his company. He didn't want any draftees that had ratings. But he had a problem because we soon got jobs that would require ratings, all three of us. And the ratings that we had were what they called, we were transferred in grade, which meant you had the ratings, but they didn't belong to the company TO. The TO was the table of organization. And even if he busted us, he couldn't use these ratings because they wouldn't exist in the company. And so we had trouble with Sergeant Campbell because we knew he was out to get us. And so we just did our jobs the best we could. And Joe Paul, he was kind of skating on thin ice because he was drinking beer. Joe did a lot of drinking. And so let's stop so far and you can ask me some questions.
What did you do like during your free time?
Your free time? Well, my job was working in the motor pool and driving officers. I had a Jeep and was driving officers at Whitehall, which was the headquarters right there in Port of Spain. And I had bought a English aerial motorcycle, which had been wrecked because somebody had wrecked it, and I bought it for $65. But working in the motor pool, I was able to straighten the frame out and get the thing back to a nice little motorcycle. Small, but not like the big ones, but it was small, but able to get around. It had 5 forward speeds, so you could get about 60 out of it. It only had 1 cylinder. And but anytime I had time off, I took off on my motorcycle. Because Trinidad is a big island, and there's a lot of interesting places on it. There's not a lot of ways to get around because there were few roads, but with the motorcycle I was able to get anywhere. And as I say, it was like a day job. If you weren't on duty, you you had a permit pass, you could go anywhere you wanted. And this is, of course, this all changed when the war started. But that's what we did in the spare time. At least what I did in the spare time is jump on my motorcycle and get going.
Can you tell us a little bit about Trinidad, like what it was like there?
Well, the first thing we had to learn was to use the English money, and you know, the tuppence and threepence and bob and florins and half crowns and all that stuff. So, and also learn to drive on the left-hand side of the road. And also to learn that ox carts and donkey carts had the right of way. You had to get out of their way, because they had perfects. And there were so many of them, especially in the city. So anyway, that was two of the things that we had to learn right away. Drive on the left, use English money. Now, maybe I should tell you about the population. Okay, there were, Trinidad had changed hands ever since Columbus discovered it. It had changed hands many times. The Spanish, the French, the Dutch, and the English had all owned it at one time or another. So you had a polyglot population that consisted of those four, plus Arawak Indians, Carib Indians, Chinese, blacks, and East Indians. A lot of apparently the Dutch had brought it, I guess, one day. So you had the three main languages were French, Spanish, and English. But there was all kinds of dialects, and probably 40 different other languages spoken. But the schools were taught in English because England, the British owned it now, and they taught the schools in English, or English. So anyway, that's the type of people you had there, and the languages and stuff that they spoke.
Did you make any close friends during trying to get them there? Are you still in contact?
Many, and they're all dead except one. And he was a tobacco farmer down in Goldsboro, North Carolina. He and his sons are now raising turkeys on kind of a tobacco thing. And in fact, I spoke to him about 3 weeks ago, and he's still alive and kicking, but he's the only one. And I had a lot of friends. But I'm in my 84th year, and I can see the light at the end of the tunnel myself. So he's the only one that I really am still in contact with. I had many friends home in Toledo and Cleveland and South Carolina and Buffalo, but they're all dead. So I only have George. His name is George Parker, and he's the only one that I still have contact with. Okay, who's next? Am I covering what you want?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. we're under the impression that you are writing a book.
But
We heard that you're writing a book.
I wrote a book. I wrote a book, and it was kind of an autobiography. Went all the way to the time I was born until now. But for the paper, I had written all these little stories about my teenage years in Orchard Park and some of the crazy things that we did. And they're in here, some of them. And I ran out of stories from the 30s, and I talked to Coleman at the Citizen, and I said, well, I'm all out of stories. I said, no, the 40s come along, and I'm in the Army for most of the 40s. He says, well, just continue on. So for the last 35 weeks, I've had an article in the paper every week. They're in here. So you'll get to read them because this I'm going to turn this over. So anyway, that's my book. I took from my book, I take a chapter and I would condense it down to a one-page story because I learned early on, don't send them a lot of stuff that they have no room to squeeze in. Send them a one-page story and you get it printed if it's interesting. Otherwise, if you make it too elaborate or too far-fetched, you're not going to print it. So I had learned early. So all these little stories are one-page stories. And just little incidents that took place, experiences I had, and trouble I got in because I didn't like officers. And it's all in there. You'll eventually be able to study this.
What possessions were you allowed to bring in the Army when you were drafted?
What?
What possessions were you allowed to bring when you were drafted?
Just the clothes you had on your back. And they took us into Buffalo. He'd come, Bill McCarthy and I. Did you know Bill McCarthy was the insurance man? Anyway, he and I were going to be called up in April. So we took a trip down to why neither he or I know why we did this, but we took a trip for about a week down. We were going to go in the show. So we took a trip down to West Virginia and Kentucky, and we came back. And the day before we were to be inducted, they called it induction. My induction papers were he and I went, and another fellow got a hold of 3 guys and we went out for one last free. Now, young fellow, we're 21 years old. We're a little bit fancy free. So we got back the night before, as I say, the day before. We went out on this fling, and we were still pretty well hung over when we went over to report to the trash. And they put us on the bus and took us into Buffalo. There were 3 other good friends besides McCarthy that were drafted at the same time as I was. Fat Offhouse from West Falls. Twisty Reed now, Fat's name was Clifford, but everybody called him Fat. Twisty Reed from East Aurora, now he was called Twisty because his first name was Oliver. I mean, this is a natural. And Shorty Ellis. Now, Shorty Ellis, he lives down the end of my street right now. Shorty Ellis was called Shorty because he was about 6'2" when he was 14 years old. He was always the tallest. He was always the tallest, so they called him Shorty. And so we were taken down in the Buffalo to a bunch of Army doctors, and they poked us with needles and poked us and prodded us and different things. And they shipped us out to Fort Niagara to become soldiers. This was April 10th, 1941. Now, everything goes alphabetical in the Army. So I soon found myself on a list for something called KP. I didn't know what the hell KP was. But KP, as you know, is kitchen police. So, it was a Sunday, and my folks were coming down. So they got me up at 5 o'clock in the morning, unceremoniously dragged me out of bed, and I worked in the kitchen until after lunch. And so my folks were coming down. I decided I'd take the afternoon off to visit my visitors. And this was a mistake. You don't just take off from something you're assigned to. And the next day I was on garbage detail with a guy with a rifle making sure I picked up all the garbage. And I said, well, already I don't like the way they do things in the Army. So, but there's nothing you can do about it. Anyway, a couple of days later, we were sent to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, to fill in the ranks of what they call a skeleton regiment. The 28th was a skeleton regiment. In other words, they had officers, they had non-coms, but they didn't have any troops to speak of. So we joined up with the 28th, and this is where Fat immediately got in trouble because when you went to chow, the CQ, the charge of quarters, always checked the barracks while everybody was in the mess hall eating. And somebody at the CQ didn't like the way Fat's bed was made up, so he tore it up. So when Fat got bad, now Fat had a short fuse, and he was not one to cross. So when this corporal said, he had to hit this, and this corporal said, I did. Fat hit him, and he landed about 3 bunks away, hollering for the first sergeant. So now Fat's gone for 3 or 4 days in the guardhouse, and finally we get him back. And so pick it up from here.
Did you see any combat at all?
No.
No?
I was with a combat outfit, but we never saw combat. We just replaced the British troops there, and we were stuck.
Did you receive any medals or badges for your service?
Well, just what they gave us here. These are what they call fruit salad, and it indicated where you were and so forth. And these are overseas bars. Each one counts 6 months, and I have 5.
Okay, when you found out that you were being drafted, like, how did you feel about that?
Well, not too much, not too good, because I was having too good a time. As I say, I was 21 years old and fancy free, and I didn't much like it, but it was a thing to do. In those days, we didn't have draft dodgers. My God, if you tried to dodge the draft, you were ostracized. You were really put down. Nobody wanted to even talk to you. In fact, guys who were crippled were trying to get in. Any way that after the war started, any way they could get into service, they would lie about their ailments and stuff to try to get in. And I knew a guy had a club foot that he could hardly walk on. His foot was like this. He walked on the back of his foot. But he tried to hide it by getting his other shoe built up so that it didn't look like one leg was 6 inches longer than the other. He try anything to get in, but they caught him, and he never did get in. So, but there was no such thing as draft dodgers in those days. Because the war had been going on since 1939 in Europe, and Hitler was running all over Europe. Nobody seemed to be able to slow him down. He had, he had everybody backed up to England. England was the only one left that was able to fight against him, and so we knew sooner or later that we were going to get into the war. And we had no army to speak of because it had been let go downhill. Well, just like when Clinton was president, the army went downhill. He didn't believe in the army. But so we had to build up an army fast, and this draft was the way to do it. That's why a lot of these old regiments from World War I were just, as I said, skeleton regiments. We had gone in to fill in. And I have to tell you about the last bunch that came to fill in the regiment. They were from New York City. Now these were the sorriest examples of people. They were entirely out of their element. You take them out of New York City, they were lost. None of them couldn't even drive, much less do anything. And so it was a sad disappointment, that last bunch that came in, and they had anybody that was just absolutely useless as a soldier, they sent him to quartermaster or someplace where they just give him a job of some kind. And so all these misfits, the Army had a place for misfits. We never found out where it was, but these people disappeared into the place for misfits, and nobody ever saw them again. I don't know what they did or where they used them, but they got rid of them out of the infantry, because the infantry, you had to be tip-top shape, because your job was to kill people and blow up things. And so these guys just didn't fit in, and it was kind of sad to see how useless these people were from New York City. It's just unbelievable how a person, you take him out of his element and he was useless.
When you found out that you were going to war, what were your expectations and how did they differ from what it was actually like?
What was the question again? I can't hear very well.
When you found out you were going to be joining the Army, what were your expectations of what it was going to be like, and what was the reality of it? How did it differ?
We had no idea. We had absolutely no idea what the Army was all about. But we were soon to find out. If we'd known anything about the Army, we certainly would have tried to avoid being in the infantry. Those are the people that get killed.
All the people from around here that you knew that got drafted at the same time as you, did you all go to the same place? Did you all end up at Trinidad, or were you all split up?
Well, those four people there were three people that I mentioned went with me to the 28th. Bill McCarthy didn't go. But he ended up in Hawaii. He was in Hawaii when the Japs attacked Hawaii. But the other three and I stuck together all through basic. Basic was 3 months. 3 months of 16-hour days, 7 days a week, working on all the armament, barbed wire, garroting, judo, bayonet practice, all that kind of stuff. 3 months of it. And once you got out of basic, then you were a regular soldier. You were a private in the army. But those were 3 tough months. I mean, it was the same type of training that the Marines get. It's just infantry is Marines are infantry, and infantry are Marines. It's the same thing.
Do you have any interesting stories that you can tell us about your stay at Trinidad or your friends that you would do?
Interesting stories. A lot of them were just interesting to me. Whether they'd be interesting to you or not, I don't know. But if you let me just take one of these little stories anywhere. Here's a little story. Now this is in Trinidad. I'm a sergeant. I'm a motor sergeant. I have a motor section. I have 40 some men. I have 32 vehicles, and I'm a motor sergeant. One day, while driving a Jeep on the Eastern Main Road on the fort near El Mamo, I saw a British sergeant pushing his motorcycle, a Norton, similar in size to my Ariel. His name was Jock Ramsey, and he was headed for Port of Spain with his monthly report. Jock was training native troops in the boonies, just east of Fort Reed near the hamlet of Valencia. The Norton had suddenly quit, and he was trying to push it to the police station in Arima, where he would be able to get transportation to Port of Spain. I told him to hang on to the Jeep, and I would tow him to my motor pool, and we would see if we could fix it. We found the rotor shaft had snapped. The one in my Ariel was not compatible, so I told him to take my Ariel to complete his journey. The Ariel did not have saddlebags, so he switched them from his Norton and left for Port of Spain. While he was gone, I took the shaft next door to the 23rd Ordnance Company and asked a friend to make a new one in the machine shop, as the broken one was made of a strange metal that could not be repaired. When Jock returned that night, we had his Norton running like a top. I now realized why he needed saddlebags, as they now each contained 3 bottles of Black Cat rum. Jock could not get over that I would put myself out to help him, as I had. The few beat-up British non-coms left in Trinidad to train native troops did not think much of American soldiers, as they were at war and were in uniform and on duty 24 hours a day. We were not at war, and sometimes ran around in our underwear in our company area when not on duty. They called us Yanks, and we called them Tommies. However, I was okay in Jock's book and could do no wrong. He introduced me to such delicacies as monkey and iguana when I ate it at his camp. They both tasted like chicken. Jock had fought the Italians in Ethiopia, the Germans in Belgium, and had survived Dunkirk. With his shirt off, it looked like someone had gone to work on it with an axe. He was in his 40s, a sergeant major, the top enlisted rank in the British Army, which was equal to our master sergeant, but the difference in pay was ridiculous. He only made about a third of what I made. The last time I saw him, I bumped into him in Port of Spain one night. He and another Tommy were celebrating Jock making warrant officer, and insisted that I go along. We ended up at HMS Benbow at Dockside. No, well, I'll explain it later. At Dockside, where Jock immediately started a fight with some sailors. We had help from some 3 Norwegian sailors, but we were badly outnumbered, lost the fight, and were thrown out. HMS Benbow was a naval canteen for the sailors from all over the world that stopped in Trinidad. All servicemen were welcome, but it was like an Irish pub. It didn't take much to get a Donnybrook going And Jack was recalled to England, and we lost touch. Now that's a little story, just an incident that to me, I don't know if it's interesting to you, but it just something that happened.
So when you were in Trinidad, did you like try a lot of things? Like you said, you tried monkey and iguana. So did you like have a lot of interesting new experiences there?
Well, the food wasn't too bad before we got in the war, but after the war, after we got involved in the war, we were kind of forgotten. You know, they forgot we were there, I guess, because we've got our problems in the South Pacific. We've got problems. We're sending troops over to England for the invasion of Europe, and the food was mighty poor. We got a lot of sea rations, but one good thing we did have, where Fort Reed was built on what was called the Naval Reserve, and it had various plantations, cocoa, rice, bananas, all kinds of plantations that had been abandoned. The British had gone back to England to fight for the mother country. And these that were left on the fort were ours for the taking. So we could find one of these abandoned plantations. They had always planted fruit around for themselves. You know, bananas and oranges, grapefruit, cassava, and mangoes, things of that sort. So we could always sneak off and get fruit. Even if we had to eat sea rations, we could get fruit. So that wasn't bad. It wasn't too bad. We didn't starve. It wasn't bad.
How long were you stationed in Trinidad?
2.5 years. I came back in January of 1944. More questions? We got more questions? Or do you want me to continue on?
You can continue. You can continue.
Where was I? Anyway, January 1944 came around, and we were notified that the original group that had been sent there in 41 was to be sent home. So now we went back to dockside, our original tent site, back in Port of Spain on the docks. They called it dockside. It was a bunch of tents where the soldiers slept. And they sent us back there, and we were waiting transportation to get back to the States. All the troop ships were very busy in the Atlantic and Pacific, so there was none for us. So there was a Dutch banana boat that was being used for a freighter. I can't remember her name for the life of me. But they just set up cots down in the hold where they usually had bananas. They set up cots down there, and they had some temporary heads and kitchen facilities. And there was less than 200 of us, so there wasn't too many of us. And so they put us on this Dutch banana boat, and we took off for New Orleans. Now, we had no escort because this Dutch boat was extra fast because it had a light load, and the subs couldn't catch it. There was a lot of submarine activity down there, lots of it, because of the oil. I haven't gotten into the oil and bauxite, and the reason we were there was a lot of oil in Trinidad. There was a lot of oil in Venezuela. There was bauxite in the Guianas, and this was all very important to the war effort because bauxite is used to make aluminum, which for making airplanes and things like that. And of course, oil was the most valuable thing that there was, gasoline and diesel fuel and things of that sort. So that was part of the reason for us being there, because with the British troops gone, there was anybody could come take it over. And so that was one of the main reasons we were there, to make sure that these bauxite deposits and all this oil didn't fall in the wrong hands. And the Dutch had the Dutch islands of Aruba and Curacao had refineries on them. They refined all of Venezuela's oil. They were right off the coast of Venezuela, and they refined the oil. And sometimes the submarines would surface at night and shell the refineries, trying to put them out of business. And they also would torpedo tankers that were right in the harbor. They'd sneak in the harbor, torpedo tankers. And this one time, a torpedo missed and it just ran up on the beach, harmlessly on the beach. But there were 3 Dutch Marines that tried to disarm it, and it blew up on them. They killed those. So anyway, oil and bauxite was a good reason for us to be there. You have another question?
Could you just tell some more stories about your stay in Trinidad?
Okay, let's just go back to page. I'll pick up a story. In the remote corners of Fort Reed, abandoned cocoa plantations could be found. These were great discoveries, as it meant fruit trees planted by the former owners were nearby. Bananas, oranges, mangoes, and grapefruit were ours for the taking. Joe Gall sometimes had a whole stalk of bananas ripening in the tool shed. We were only a few degrees north of the equator, so tropical fruit was available year-round. There were also abandoned coconut plantations on the beaches, and the moonshiners among us soon found out that by letting air into one of the holes in the green coconut and then plugging it back up, produced a mighty potent drink when allowed to ferment. Coconuts were plentiful and rum was cheap, so if you were a drinking man, you were home free, right? There were still natives living in the mountains to the north who had to use the eastern main road and our main gate to get to town. There was only one road that ran completely. The island was 40 miles wide, but there was only one road that ran across it, and it ran right through the fort. There were still natives living in the mountains to the north who had to use the eastern main road and our main gate to get to town. They made charcoal to sell in Port of Spain and would set out the night before to get there. They load up the donkey cart. They put this charcoal in burlap bags, load up the donkey cart, and then they get they go to sleep on top of the load, trusting the donkey to get them to town. In the morning, it was about 15 miles. If the guard at the main gate saw the driver asleep, he would quietly lead the donkey around the sentry booth and send him back the way he came. The driver would then find himself back home in the morning when he awoke. This was a dirty trick to play on someone trying to earn a meager living, and the donkey probably had to take a beating for something that was not his fault. After a while, they caught on and stayed awake past the main gate. A number of Hindus lived in Trinidad, and no one was allowed to harm their sacred cows in any way. This became a problem in Fort Reed, as a number of them were left on when the fort was built. They had no fear of man or vehicle, having been coddled all their lives, and were a threat to life and limb for everyone, especially after dark. Finally, Colonel Summers had a conference with the chief Hindu honchos and told them that if the Brahmins were not removed from the fort, all the mess halls would be featuring hamburgers next week. That got action from the Hindus, who soon rounded them up and took them off the poles. But they were still a problem everywhere else. The narrow gauge railroad ran from Port of Spain 35 miles south to San Fernando in the oil fields, and 15 miles east to Arima, a good-sized village just outside our fort, servicing sugar, rice, and cocoa plantations on the way. United States Engineering Department built a spur to build supplies to Fort Reed and brought our own narrow gauge engine and some box and flat cars to use on the narrow gauge rails. The engine and cars' formerly job was hauling freight and potatoes in northern Maine. They had even brought the engineer from Maine to run it. To see a little engine thousands of miles from home chugging through the bush with Bangor and a rooster still painted on the tender was something you did not expect.
Could you guys come back in a second? I just need all your minutes.
3 minutes? Gotta wind it up? Okay.
Well, you guys can write it.
As I say, we came back to the States, we landed in New Orleans. We had no cold weather clothes. We had put on 2 sets of khakis, trying to keep warm. And they put us on a troop train. He kept us there for 3 days in quarantine. Put us on a troop train, 2 more days to get into Fort Devens in Massachusetts. Now, it's colder than hell in Massachusetts in the wintertime. This is in January. And the 2 sets of khakis didn't do much. And from there we were to be reassigned. And I was sent to Fort Custer, Michigan, to join the 74th Infantry Regiment. That ought to just about wind us up. That's about it. 1 minute.
Thank you so much for all your stories.
Okay. All right. Now I'm going to leave this with you. You guys own that now. When you open the front page, I want you to read the front page. Read it aloud.
Michelle. Oh, okay. On Wednesday at noon, a paper sack filled with water was dropped out of the window of the science laboratory and landed on one of the grade school pupils who was standing on the ground. I believe it was intended that this missile should land on this particular boy. As soon as I knew about it, I started making inquiry and soon had a rather good idea that the 3 boys above mentioned were responsible. 2 of these boys, when I interviewed them, denied participation. Later they admitted to me. I hardly need to say that the school cannot tolerate things of this sort. However, after talking the matters over with some of the members of the faculty and with the boys themselves, I have decided to suspend sentence in this matter. I have told all 3 of the boys that if they are in any way responsible for any other breaches of discipline during the present school year, that it will mean immediate suspension. I am sure that the parents of these boys will cooperate with us in our effort to maintain reasonable disciplinary standards in the school. I should be very glad to discuss this matter with any of the parents concerned if there appears to be any reason for doing so. Cordially,
Lawrence Johnson.
Lawrence Johnson.
So that's how things start off.
Your pranks.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
We leave everything right here.